Hello, I'm Mr. Bobblemorris. The human Mr. Morris is too busy and too stupid.
I heard that.
No, you didn't.
Okay.
To do this himself, so he asked me to give you a quick rundown on the theories of Hobbes and Locke and Jefferson. So here we go. So here's all the stuff that we're going to cover in this slideshow. It might be too much for you to fit into your study guide, but you'll just have to kind of figure out what the key parts are and reword things and do the best you can. So Thomas Hobbes may have lived a long time ago, but he's a very important philosopher to us because of his theory of the social contract. He imagined that before government existed, there was life was basically something he called a state of nature, a very chaotic and violent and dangerous way to live with no order or safety or laws. Eventually, people formed a social contract. What that means? It means an agreement among each other to appoint a sovereign to rule over them and then to obey whatever he says to do. In other words, people gave up their natural rights and equality and agreed to live under the rule of a sovereign in exchange for order and safety. According to Hobbes, you could not break the contract. Because of what he lived through in English history, he saw that if you rebelled against a king, basically you reverted back to the state of nature, and that's even worse than living under a bad king. John Locke lived a little later than Hobbes did, and agreed with a lot of what he said, but he took his social contract theory and changed it a little bit. He pointed out that people were born with natural rights. Simply by being a human being, you have a right to life, liberty, and property, and you cannot give those rights up. So he disagreed with that part of Hobbes' theory. The sovereign's duty is to rule and provide safety and order, but also to protect and respect the people's natural rights. And if a sovereign does not do his job right, if he violates those rights, he has broken the contract. Under Locke, the contract was between the people and the sovereign. And if that happens, then the people can rebel and replace the sovereign with a new king. And by doing this, he basically was denying a centuries-old theory that kings were appointed by God. And he said, no, kings are appointed by the people. Locke's changes to what Hobbes had to say is very important to us Americans, because eventually we had a disagreement with a king and wanted to rebel against him and replace him with a new government. Thomas Jefferson wrote all of our ideas down in the Declaration of Independence, and if you look at it very closely, you'll notice that he echoes an awful lot of what Locke had to say about a century before, when he said all men are created equal. This was similar to what Locke said when he said he believed in natural equality in the state of nature, and when he denied that kings had a divine right to rule over us. When Jefferson said we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, he was basically saying exactly what Locke said, that we're born with natural rights that can't be taken away. When Jefferson goes further in the Declaration and says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, he's saying that people create government, and that the purpose of government is to protect our natural rights, which is exactly what Locke said. That governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed, the permission of the governed. The people permit the government to exist and give it its powers by agreeing to live under it. That's basically a restatement of the social contract. Further, whenever any government becomes destructive of these ends, what he's talking about here is that if a government does not fulfill its purpose but actually violates or fails to protect the people's rights, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government. In other words, when the government fails to live up to its purpose and breaks the contract, the people can change their government. This is the heart of the Declaration of Independence, and pretty much Locke would have agreed with most of what Jefferson has said so far. But in the next sentence or two in the Declaration, Jefferson goes on to say that the new government can take whatever form and be organized and based on whatever principles that the people think best. And Locke would have disagreed with that because he was a monarchist. He believed in kings and monarchy, But Jefferson was an American, justifying a revolt against a king, and he knew that Americans probably wouldn't want a new king, that we were probably going to form a republic, which is a representative democracy without a king. So he kind of worded it more vaguely and left that open, that possibility. So, Mr. Jefferson, would you say this is a fair summary of what you wrote?
Why, yes, this is excellent. You're doing a simply smashing job, I must say.
And your Bobble Highness, I want to make sure you understand we're talking about King George a long time ago. Nothing personal against you, of course.
Oh, no! How could I possibly be offended by anything you have to say, Mr. Bobblicious?
That's Mr. Bobblemorris. Oh dear. On to the last slide. Students sometimes misunderstand the Declaration. They think it's a constitution, but it's not. Its only purpose was to explain how Americans think government's supposed to work, the theory of government. And it's also was supposed to justify a revolution. It doesn't actually describe a government. It doesn't actually put any details in about what our government might actually look like. It's just a declaration. When we did finally write down our Constitution, we began it with something we call a preamble or introduction. And there is a very famous list of the 6 purposes of the Constitution. They are: to form a more perfect union. That was a reference to our previous Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, that just didn't work very well. To establish justice. That meant that they realized that they were trying to create a more fair and just system for us to live in. To ensure domestic tranquility. Meant to maintain safety and order within the country. To provide for the common defense. That meant defend us from our enemies. Promote the general welfare, to do what's best for most Americans. And to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Meant that they were trying to create a government that would protect freedom for them and for all future generations, meaning you. And there you go. That should give you plenty of material to fill in the first couple pages of Unit 1 Study Guide. Anything you'd like to add, President Obobblebama?
Nope.